Hello, I am Sherry Vilmark and I'm with Community Energy Project. And today we are going to talk about how to insulate a flat attic yourself. Disclaimer, this workshop was built here in Portland, Oregon, and the advice in it is pretty specific to the Pacific Northwest. So you may have different rules and different best practices where you live. This workshop was created in partnership with Balanced Energy Solutions, an organization that has a great deal of experience in the field, insulating homes, and they provided not only the expertise, but the props and the photos, so we thank them for that. And the funding is provided by the Energy Trust of Oregon, who funded the workshop for years before we came to create this video. Community Energy Project has been around for over 40 years. We provide community education on lead poisoning prevention, do-it-yourself weatherization, and we are the low-income facilitator for the Oregon Community Solar Program. We also work directly in homes, mostly for seniors and people with disabilities, conducting weatherization, safety repairs, energy analysis, and upgrades. So why are we here? Why weatherization, right? Increases home comfort. You have fewer drafts. It's warmer in winter and cooler in the summer. Can reduce your energy bills. As we get up into the attic, we may find some safety issues that need to be resolved. Can help prevent mold because we talk quite a bit about ventilation, and it can reduce your carbon footprint. In Multnomah County, at least as of 2017, about 18% of our carbon footprint actually comes from residential energy use. So this is a place where you can make a difference. And a note to renters, if you are renting a house and wanting to do this kind of work yourself, be sure to get it in writing. We suggest reaching out to the Community Alliance of Tenants for advice on how to have strong documentation between you and your landlord so that expectations can be very clear. What we're going to cover today is we're going to start with why we're focusing on the attic and not, say, the walls or the floor. We're going to dig into safety. We're going to go through how to do your own energy audit. This is where we're going to find out what the needs of your home are and help put together a supply list. We're going to talk about ventilation, insulation, and financial incentives that are specific to Oregon as of the recording of this workshop, which is in 2022. In this case, we are going to be talking about the flat attic. This is the image on the left. The area that's not being used as living or storage space. A flat attic has very different needs. It's much more simple than the more finished attic, where you have what are called knee walls. But some of the information in today's workshop may be helpful, even if you have a finished attic you want to work on. So why the attic? Well, hot air rises, so this is the most efficient part of the house to weatherize. Most homes have attic spaces, and it's a really great do-it-yourself project. And additionally, because it's so effective at reducing your energy burden, it's easier to get incentives. There are two components of weatherization we're going to get into in this workshop. One is focused on air sealing. This helps stops the air from escaping through gaps and cracks. Think of it like a windbreaker. You can really cut down on that airflow, which increases your comfort. And the other is insulation. So insulation creates this barrier that slows down the flow of heat as it's leaving your living space, or in the summer, trying to enter your living space. Think of this like a sweater. Ideally, you want both the sweater and the windbreaker on a cold and windy day. Get into some safety. Also with safety, I'll do some definitions. So one is joists. What is a joist? These are the beams that support drywall and also you and your weight. This is where you want to keep, while you're in your attic area, all of your weight on the joists. You can see them. There are these orange beams that are down in the bottom, and there's insulation in between them. A lot of times people may lay plywood across the joists so that they can move around more easily without having to balance on them. They're pretty close together though, so if you have a little bit of agility, you might be able to go without. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, can vary based on preferences. I would say that the ones you definitely want to have is a headlamp. You want hands-free light that can be directed. Even hanging a lamp can cast a lot of shadows that can be kind of confusing in an attic space. There are a lot of things that are coming up through your roof deck, and some kind of respirator or dust mask. Attic spaces can be pretty nasty, and depending on the kind of insulation you have, or if there have been roof repairs or rodent infestations, you're really not going to want to breathing that. Disposable gloves, ones that are not necessarily like surgeon's gloves, like latex gloves, but something a little more heavy duty, like a gardening glove, it's also a good idea. It's optional. This guy's wearing a bunny suit or a Tyvek suit. A lot of that's about keeping you from getting itchy. If you have, sensitive knees, you may want knee pads. You may want to like tape your sleeves and ankles or have safety glasses. Be aware that, especially if you're working in the summer, this all can get very hot. So, do what's best for you. So I'm going to be making reference to the roof deck pretty frequently. All that means is it's the underside of the roof. There are several things, there are 4 things that we've listed here that we've determined mean this is not a DIY friendly job, not until these things are taken care of. One of them is roof leaks, extensive mold, vermiculite, and Noventube wiring. Roof leaks need to be taken care of before you're doing any kind of insulation. Not only is a roof leak going to ruin your insulation, but it's typically a best practice to deal with structural issues before you deal with energy upgrades. Best thing you can do, I found, is when it's raining really heavily, pop up there with a flashlight and look to see if there's anything fresh happening and deal with that before you weatherize. Another one is mold. The Pacific Northwest is plagued with this one. You can deal with mold yourself if you're talking about, say, maybe 3 square feet of mold. In this case, you can take hydrogen peroxide and a scrub brush and really go at it. Mold is also an indicator that you have a ventilation issue. And this is something we're going to spend some time with. So you can clean up mold, but to keep mold from coming back, you really need to prevent it and manage the moisture inside the space where you have a mold issue. If you have an enormous mold problem and your roof deck is completely covered with it, you might look into professional mitigation. Vermiculite. This is a type of insulation that I have some right here. This is a type of insulation. It's kind of shiny. It's really easy to spot. I don't think you can really mistake it for anything else. That was mined in the same places that asbestos was being mined. So it may have asbestos in it. You can pay for testing, but because within an attic, you can have vermiculite from multiple places and multiple times, different bags, you may test negative when you have a positive. This is one that we recommend professional mitigation. Don't touch it, don't disturb it, do not take shop vac to it. Asbestos can cause cancer, and we really recommend that you have it dealt with. We're going to have a link to a do-it-yourself manual where we outline a lot of these things, and we will include some local contractors that remove vermiculite. Another one is Noventube wiring. You're going to find this in older houses around the turn of the century. So if you're talking in a 1915 and older, you may have Noventube wiring. And if you can imagine the electrical load of a 1915 house versus now, you can understand that a lot more is being demanded of these systems than they were made to handle. You do not want to blow insulation up against this. What's best is to have an electrician deal with it, remove it, or, work around it, like reroute your electricity, what have you, before you blow an attic into your insulation. Another safety note is to watch your step. Stay on your joists or you'll have to do a ceiling repair. The picture on the left is a foot that went through the ceiling. Oops. And nails are often sticking out of roof decks, and so watch your head. And take note, if you may find dead critters up there or waste, mouse droppings, are pretty common, or squirrels. But if you have a major issue, you may want to remove insulation if it's been thoroughly damaged, or you feel it has a health issue. It poses a health issue. Also, uncovered junction boxes. We're going to want to get those covered up before we start blowing insulation. And another note is that attics can become extremely hot. And if you're going to do this project in the summer, we're talking easily can rise above 120 degrees. Your personal protective equipment is going to make you warmer. The work is pretty physically demanding. There's a lot of squatting involved. And if that's hard on you, it may be tough on you. So we recommend just taking the afternoon off. Take a break if you're feeling faint or tired or achy, and don't wait till you're thirsty to drink water. You don't want to fall in between the joists and through your roof. So don't hurt yourself. Oops. So now we're going to get into the do-it-yourself energy audit. This is how the pros do it, so may as well do it like them. So first you want to make a sketch of your space. And what we're going to do with that sketch is we're going to determine what's the scope of your work. What are we going to do if you have recessed can lights or dropped soffits? What about exhaust fans, gas pipes? There's a lot of things that you're going to want to record on your sketch so that we can deal with it topside. So first is your scope of work. Maybe there's a section of your house you don't want to insulate, say a garage or a patio, an area where you aren't really heating or cooling, and it doesn't really matter to you if it experiences extreme temperatures. What we focus on is the scope of work is the area where you're going to do this job. So if you have an unconditioned space, that has separate rules when we're talking about doing this kind of internal audit. In this case, what this image shows is that you had an unconditioned area, say a garage, and then your house, you create this dam, this insulation dam that holds all the insulation in place and boxes you in here. So in your basic floor plan, depending on what you know about your home, you may not know what the square footage of your attic is. You can determine this by measuring the rooms in your house. You also may be able to look it up or look at an inspection if you are a homeowner. And what we want to include is anything that punches through to the attic space. One example is recessed can lights. These there's a lot of variety in recessed can lights. And what is an indicator of what you need to do on the attic side is going to determine if they're ICAT rated. So ICAT means insulation contact, meaning insulation can sit directly on the light, and that's not a problem. And airtight, meaning that air is not escaping around the light bulb or around the sides up into your attic space. It's an air sealing issue as well. You can pull out the inner lining here. The can light here on the right has a little lining. You can pull that out and look on the inside, and you'll have a type, you may have indicators on the inside or on the top. Hopefully you do. So you want to check that out and see if they're not airtight. You're going to want to add them to your list. If they're not, if they're not ICAT rated at all, you want to add them to your list because we're going to have to deal with them in the attic. So circle how many you have and about where they are on your drawing. Another one is drop soffits. Drop soffit here it's that space right above the cupboards in this picture, because why have more cupboard space when you can have a drop soffit? There's a lot of ways that these show up in the attic space up top, but you're going to want to draw them on your space as well, because you're going to look for them and see what's happening up top. This is also good to know if you ever want to do a kitchen remodel and you want to remove your drop soffits. You'll want to know if insulation is going to pour down on you or not, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You also want to take a look at your range hood. This is the fan right above your stove. really good idea to have. If you've ever wanted to have that properly ducted, now's the time. Do this before you insulate your attic. But you may not know if it is ducted or not, or if it's recirculating. Just in this case, a lot of times you can just pop open the cupboards and see, oh, look, there's a duct. You want to put that on your drawing because we're going to look, where does that duct actually go? You might be surprised. You can also feel when you turn on the fan, you can feel if the air comes out from up top to see if it's recirculating or not. Another one that you want to look for is bathroom fans. And it may be a good idea to see if your bathroom fan is actually doing its job or if it's just being really noisy. The way you can do this is you can get a piece of toilet paper, turn on your fan, put the square of toilet paper up on the fan. And if the fan can hold on to that piece of TP, then it's at least doing its minimum job. And if it can't, it might be a good time to replace your fan. And again, replacing it now before you insulate your attic, just a good idea. For people who are natural gas customers, you may look to see if pipes come up through your attic. If you have, this is a gas water heater. I can tell by the brass, they're the copper tubes coming outside, or whatever. Those are your hot and cold water. And this duct is going straight horizontal out, probably in a basement that's being vented that way. If it were in the garage and going straight up, and the garage is outside of your scope of work, you don't need to take note of it. If you are insulating your garage or it's somewhere in your conditioned space, you definitely want to take note of gas flues, as well as fireplace flues or wood stove flues or anything, ceiling fans, anything, again, just punching a hole into your ceiling, chandeliers. Next, you'll want to do an exterior audit. This is where we're going to look at your different kinds of ventilation, from soffit vents, mushroom vents, stem vents, gable vents, ridge vents. There's all kinds of ventilation that can happen, and you want to take a look at what you have. But why are you counting roof vents? Well, ideally, what you have is inside your home is this conditioned space. You are paying to heat and cool it. This is where you're living your life, and you want it to be very comfortable. And then in the case of the attic, you have this layer of insulation on top that's protecting you. And above that insulation is this well-ventilated space, like outside. It's not just holding on to heat all summer and trapping it in there, eventually seeping through your attic insulation, right? It's like flowing. Ideally, you don't want more than 80% of your ventilation to be high up on the roof. This is because heat rises, and you have this airflow that happens much more efficiently if you have lower level vents. So soffit vents, very different than a drop soffit. Don't ask me who names this stuff. Soffit vents are like, they live under your soffit, which is also called an eave. You may not have them, like the home on the left does not, but you want to look for them to see that if you do. These are lower ventilation options. So you want to draw those, count how many, draw them on your sketch. There are vents that exist that are adequate and some that are inadequate. This may seem like an adequate vent, but then kind of hard to tell. There's actually this extra screen that's on here, and it's way too small. This is not going to move very much air. There's basically no point in counting it. Also on the left, vinyl siding, teeny tiny little holes, not nearly enough ventilation. If you want to compare that to, say, a bird block vent, or, you know, just a hole cut in some wood with a grate on it to keep critters out, the airflow through here is just going to be so much more efficient. It's going to be enormous. And you can also use louver vents, which are here on the bottom. Count the ones on the right. Don't bother to count the ones on the left. You're going to have to deal with the ventilation. Gable vents here on the left, really big, really great airflow. And then you have mushroom vents, which are also called roof jacks. These can be quite sizable, as you can see here. And you can just stand outside and just count. You want to count, again, how many do I have? The stem vent or gooseneck vent is very different. And we're going to learn more about this in ventilation, but you can see it has a different shape. It also has very different bottom than roof jacks have. So you want to count those differently. And then ignore sewer pipes are also sticking out of your roof. That's a different project. Then it's time to go up into your attic. First, you need to find your attic access. Hopefully you know where it is. They can be stashed and kind of tricky. They can be in garages. They can be in hallways. Sometimes they can even be in closets. And what we want to look for is, are there any deal breakers that need to be dealt with before you do this yourself? And you're also going to orient yourself to your sketch. You're going to look for heat producing fixtures, ventilation situation, air sealing, and your current R value. And we're going to create a supply list. So let's get into these. So once you've located your attic access, again, you may need a ladder to climb up to it. It may have little fold down stairs, like in this photo. You want to bring your light, your masks, maybe empty any valuables. They don't get lost up there, anything loose. And you want to see if this is a conditioned area. Is it weather stripped? Does it have weather stripping in it? And does it have insulation in it? I can see in this picture, it does not. It's not insulated because where there would be insulation, there are stairs instead. And it's probably not air sealed, although I can't tell completely by this photo. You want to look for evidence of previous air sealing. So ideally, what you want to see is this bright, ugly foam, could be pink or orange or white, and you want it to seal certain areas. So one of the things that you want sealed is what's called the top plate. So here on the picture on the right, what we have is the joist, right? This is the beam that you stand on, is sitting on top of this top plate. And then there's two pieces of drywall that come up to it, probably say in between two bedrooms. And then you have the drywall, it's the ceiling to the bedroom, and they come up to this top plate, which is above the walls in your bedroom. And then you have joists sitting perpendicular to those, sits on top of them. At any rate, what is a good practice is to simply seal, to do some air sealing, as a lot of air can escape between the drywall and the top plate. Also electronics, it's a good idea to seal. You just want to see, like, is there any foam anywhere? If not, probably need to add that to your shopping list. Another thing is chases, and we want to see what happened with those drop soffits. So on the left, we can see this is a drop soffit. It's probably above the kitchen. So remember when we opened up those cupboards above the range hood, here's the pipe sticking out. And you can see that the drop soffit has, it's got some insulation in it. Good practice is to take a piece of rigid foam, like a thin light board, and to cap it. Then, as I mentioned, if you ever want to remove those drop soffits later, it would be capped. You can remove them and not have insulation pour down into your project. So it's a good idea to do that. And you also don't waste insulation by filling it unnecessarily. It's not going to really help you much. A chase is a deep, terrifying hole that takes you all the way through your house. So these tend to follow being next to chimneys. So sometimes you'll have like a chimney in your living room, and then there's this extended kind of bump of drywall around the side, and it's just a big hole. They can also, in really old houses, be like next to bathtubs. You definitely want to cap that with foam as well, because your insulation is just going to fall down there. And you want to put chases, especially, it's good to put some kind of flag, like an indicator, just to make extra sure that in the future, if another contractor's up there, they're not going to step on that rigid foam and fall through, injure themselves. Here we tend to take a look at what's the ventilation situation going on here. Because you may have a duct that comes from your living space, but then where does it go? So here are some kind of amusing pictures. The one on the left, the top left here, is an exhaust fan with like a partial duct. And what you can actually see is this discoloration right at the place where the steam is basically going, that's mold. And so that is what's going to happen. What you want is moisture coming from the bathroom, you know, if you have running for a steamy shower or you're boiling water and you want all that steam and all that moist air to go through your attic space, not go into your attic at all, through the roof deck and out of your house. Moisture is an unwelcome guest in an attic space. So building a fan, a duct, and then pointing it in the general direction of a vent is not going to cut it. And then sometimes you have on the bottom left, nothing at all. And all that steaming air, that's a bathroom fan, is just getting pumped into your attic, creating mold situations. So if you found mold earlier, you may look for some of these situations to see if that's why you have mold. So you want to see, do I have ducts? If not, I need to add duct work to my shopping list. Another thing is, I'm not going to be happy just if you have ducts. We also want those ducts to be sealed. Here is sealing in this picture with mastic. You can also seal your duct work with foil tape, which we'll get into when it comes to actually doing the work. You want to see sealing there. And then ideally, you also want to see the duct to be insulated. So if you can imagine in the winter, your duct work is in this cold attic. It's like ice, right? It's freezing cold and hot, steamy air hits it, right? You're going to have condensation, just like on a pop can, right? And that condensation is going to drip back down. And if you've ever seen it where a bathroom fan has water drip down through the fan on a person, it's probably what's happening. And it's unusual, but in old houses before building codes, you may actually have water pipes running through your ceiling. And the reason they haven't frozen is because they've been getting a free ride from the inside of your conditioned space, and you're about to cut that off. Once you insulate the attic, your attic isn't going to be unnecessarily warm. So you absolutely, if you have water pipes running through, be sure to insulate them. You can just get pipe foam. It's very cheap, like 35 cents for 2 feet of pipe foam. And you can cut it to fit and wrap your pipes. Another term that we will be utilizing is what's called a baffle. Baffling just keeps insulation where it's supposed to be. We don't want it to block duct or we don't want it to block ventilation, sorry. We don't want it to come in contact with heat producing fixtures. So baffles keep that from happening. And you're going to want to see, are my heat producing fixtures baffled or not? If so, got to add baffle to the shopping list. So some examples of heat producing fixtures would be your gas furnace flue, a gas water heater flue, which I touched on earlier. If you have a chimney flue, and possibly recessed lighting if it's not IC rated, right? Which means insulation can come in contact with it. So what you want to do is you want to count how many of these heat producing fixtures there are and add this to your supply list. I will say with recessed lighting, I have been asked this in workshops, well, what if I have LED lighting or CFL or compact fluorescent lighting? Those don't really produce very much heat, so is it a problem? And the official rule on that is, no, it's not going to be a problem with that lighting. But if in the future your home is owned by other people who are using incandescent lighting, which can become very, very hot, it may be a problem. So they consider baffling a best practice if your recessed lighting is not IC rated. Right, just what I said, count these guys. I love this picture on the left because it tells you nothing. It says could be, maybe, maybe not. Best practice there would be to treat it as if it is not ICAT rated. Gas furnace and water heater flues. Here are some just more pictures of that, right? The one on the right would not be a problem, but the one on the left probably, I mean, maybe is, depends on the house, but it's going up. If you have brick chimney, the rules here is that you baffle it if you're going to use cellulose insulation. And you can actually use fiberglass batting. Fiberglass batting are the rolls. Like a lot of times when we think of insulation, we think of this big roll that gets rolled out like a carpet. That's batting. You can actually wrap a brick chimney with that if you're going to use fiberglass. Metal chimneys must be baffled regardless of the type of insulation you're using. Now you're going to look at the vents. Now you counted, so say you're like, hey, I have 12 soffit vents. But if you can't see any light coming through them and you can't find those 12 vents on the inside, then they kind of don't count. You can get a friend, person to shine a big flashlight up into each of the vents, but you may have to block them. It's pretty common for homeowners to feel like, gosh, my house is really cold. I go up into my attic, look at these holes, and like shove insulation and such in the holes in an attempt to keep their home warmer. I've seen this several times, so you may need to just check on them. And we'd also heard a situation where people were installing roof jacks on the roof, but they weren't cutting the holes around the bottom. They were just screwing them to the roof. So they didn't really exist. So you just want to double check to make sure that what you've seen on the outside matches with what's going on the inside. Then we're going to look at, do we have adequate ventilation? So I will say there is some contention about these calculations. This is probably one that's going to vary quite a bit based on where you're living. What we were told by contractors was they were also hired to do mold mitigation, that they've never seen mold by following this calculation. So it might be overkill. It might not. People have different opinions about it. But I am going to err on the side of overkill to keep mold out of your living space. So what you need is to calculate what's called the NFA, net free area. I brought this up earlier, right? This isn't the same as having just a hole because there's a screen. And that screen is technically blocking air. And therefore it impacts how much air is actually coming and going from your space. In the manual, we have a net free area like cheat sheet that has general rules on how much NFA you're actually getting for different kinds of ventilation. General rule is if you have lower and upper ventilation, not more than 80% upper ventilation, you need 1 square foot of NFA for every 300 square feet of attic space. Okay. If you have upper only ventilation, you need to double the amount of ventilation that you have. So that would be 1 square foot of NFA for every 150 square feet of attic space. Here is our little cheat sheet of different kinds of ventilations. So we have, say, a 4x6 louver vent, right? Those are the white vents with, I have one here. This is a louver vent. If you're going to have ventilation put in, it's probably going to be something like this. But see how it has a screen on it as well. So these are the different kinds of NFA you have just as a general rule to check out. I'm going to take you through a calculation. So let's say you have a 900 square foot attic space and you need 3 square feet of NFA. Okay, because it has upper and lower ventilation. And you're counting, you're like, ooh, I have 6 mushroom vents or roof jacks. I have 6 of these. And according to my cheat sheet, each of those is 0.28 NFA. So 6 times 0.28 is 1.68. And you have 3 louver vents, right? And you know the size, they're 4x16s. That's 3 times 0.1 or 0.21, which is what our cheat sheet says. So that's 0.63 NFA. Add those together, you have 2.3 square feet of NFA to work with. That is short of 3 feet. But again, you know, if you're looking, you have like no mold problems. It's really up to you to decide if you want to have additional ventilation put in or not. Another thing you want to take a look at is, what's my starting R value? What is R value? So basically, different kinds of insulation have different kinds of properties. The same way as if you had a cotton shirt versus a wool shirt. They might be the same thickness, but they're going to have very different insulating properties. So R value is determined by what kind of insulation do I have and how many inches deep is it. I have some examples of different little baggies here for you. So if you're looking at fiberglass loose fill, this is modern fiberglass. It's very fluffy. Modern fiberglass isn't even itchy. I'll take you through some better pictures of it as well. You have rock wool, which is this dark color. It's very good. It's very good at insulating. Cellulose, which is more of a brown, it's like recycled paper. You may have some really weird stuff, wood pulp or newspaper up there. Regardless, what you want to do is like, what kind of insulation do I have? And what is the average depth if I spread it out across my entire scope of work? This is your R value. So if you've got drifts or piles of stuff here, but there's 0 here, you want to do your best to average it out so that you understand what your starting place is and how much insulation you need to add to your shopping list. So in Oregon, with Energy Trust, as of this point, you need to start with an R value of 18 or less and end with an R value of 38 or more in order to get incentives to offset the cost of your project. And this works in investor-owned utilities, so Pacific Power, Portland General Electric, or Northwest Natural. We highly recommend just bringing it up to R49, which is Energy Star, and will probably be a new standard eventually anyway. The hard part is not adding more insulation. It's all the prep work you have to do before adding insulation. So may as well go for it. That's our recommendation. But to give you an idea, if you went up there and found you had cellulose fiber, that's going to be 5.5 inches of cellulose averaged across your entire attic is going to be R18 or less. And what we want to bring it to is 3 times that, 15.5 inches deep. And you can see that fiberglass, has less insulation properties. So it takes 21.5 inches to have the same result if you're going to be working with fiberglass. All right, so let's get into a little bit more about what these insulations look like so that you can determine what the heck you have. I have broken them down into 3 scientifically determined categories: itchy, classic, and ancient. Ancient could also be like, what? So you got your itchies. This is the stuff that a lot of people will wear the Tyvek suits to protect themselves from. Their tape and ankles and stuff. Fiberglass, old school fiberglass, is yellow and pink, and a lot of us have probably seen it. Rock wool is supposed to be king of all the itchies, and that is a black or gray, and it is literally rocks and wool. Some of your more classics is vermiculite. Again, vermiculite is a deal breaker. You want to have that removed. And then you have fiberglass batting. And I'm going to get into, this is a good image, as good an image as any to show. What we're going to focus on is actually blown insulation. Fiberglass batting is much more tricky to install. You can see here that it fits perfectly with these joists, which, lucky. You may not have that situation. And then it has to be cut down perfectly, and it has to equal the exact height of the top of the joist as well, because this is not enough insulation to bring you to an adequate modern R value. So you're going to have to lay the batting perpendicular to these as well. And you don't want a bunch of like gaps and drafts. It's more work. It's no less expensive unless you get your hand on free batting, and it's harder to do properly. So that's why our focus is on blown insulation. And then you just have what? People are creative. And especially if you're in older homes, people have used bark dust or what's called Kimsol. It's a type of compressed paper. It's not hurting anything. It's just not really very good at doing its job. It's better than nothing, but it's not great. And there are so many more types of insulation. You can have wool insulation, you can have ground up jeans that are denim insulation. There are dozens of different kinds. The kinds we're going to talk about today are just fiberglass and cellulose, both blown, because they're really easy to get your hands on. You can go to a big box store and find it, or a local hardware store and find it. And it's cheap, effective, relatively easy to install. So that's what we're going to focus on. Sorry for those excited about some different, more next level insulations out there. So currently, last I heard, fiberglass is about 60% recycled content. I have heard rumors that there are some 100% out there, but I haven't confirmed them. Cellulose is 82% recycled content, and it can't go any higher than that because the rest of it is looking at your mold, rodent, and fire retardant. It's a higher R value. So if you have less space, you can blow to a higher R value with that less space. And it's more like green, recycled materials. But if you're sensitive to dust, be aware it's extremely dusty during installation. So if you have sensitivities about that, you may want to second guess it or take additional precautions to deal with it. When you're buying bags of insulation, that's going to tell you. We have our little cheat sheet. Here's general R values for different kinds of insulation, but the bag is going to be what's most efficient. It's that specific product. And your coverage charts are going to help you as well. So for example, reading this chart, say we want to blow to R49, go wild and go to R60, I would approve. You blow into R49, you're like, I've got 1,000 square feet. All right, I'm going to need 23.5 bags. If you're starting at R0, right? You may have existing insulation, and unless it's vermiculite or it's really saturated in rat urine, things I get to say, you can just leave the insulation as it is and just blow this right on top of it. So you can start from scratch if you want to, but just when you're buying your bags, think about you may be starting at R10, and that's going to save you almost 5 bags of insulation. If you do have fiberglass batting, oftentimes people will, if they're installing themselves, they'll put in the batting and there's this paper that may be on top. A lot of people think that that's the way it's supposed to go down, which is not. It's incorrect. You don't want to blow insulation on top of batting that has that paper in between. It's a moisture management feature. So you want to just rip off the paper, and then you can blow your insulation on top of that if you want to, but keep the batting paper off. All right, now we get into weatherization. So at this point, you have determined this is a safe do-it-yourself job and you are ready to go. You've conducted a thorough audit. You have gathered and purchased your supplies, and you will definitely not have to go to the hardware store 37 more times to get a single item. No, because you put together the perfect shopping list. Amazing. Now we're getting into how do we actually do the air sealing, ventilation, and insulation. First, we're going to start with air sealing. So air sealing is all about preventing air from escaping, and it also is an important step before preparing your attic for insulation. You want to air seal before you insulate because you're not going to be able to access these areas when there's 2 feet of insulation. So we're going to go into locations, the kind of equipment that we're looking at. We're going to touch on weather stripping, and how to cap those drop soffits and chases. So here are some foam basics. You can get foam that has a little straw on it that you can use as opposed to getting a gun. But the word on, and my personal experience, is that you don't even end up using like the whole can because something goes wrong with the straw. So if you're going to be doing a lot of air sealing and a lot of air sealing at once, we really recommend getting your hands on an actual gun. You can get them online for $20 or $30 or in a lot of hardware stores that have a weatherization section. And how the gun works is that you have this nut on the back, and as you twist it, it controls the size of the bead of foam that comes out the front. Just get the cheapest foam you can. It's like fire rated foam. There are different kinds of foams that are like non-expansion for, say, installing windows. You don't really have to worry about that. These things can expand all they want. It's not delicate work, and it doesn't have to be pretty. So what you would do is, and this one is used, but there's a little thread of screw right here. You screw it in and it'll break the seal. And at that point, you can start utilizing your gun and spray foam will come out. If you use up an entire can, leave it on there. If you're going to say you're done for the day, you want to tighten the nut so that it seals up as much as possible and leave the can on because it's pressurized. And it'll last for a few days before foam starts to cure in the barrel. But as a general rule, try and get all your foaming done in a couple of days, as quickly as you can, because eventually your gun will just not work very well. And there are chemical cleaners to try to get in there, but it is difficult to make happen. Also, let the foam dry before cleaning it up. So if you get foam in a place you don't want to get, it'll cure and get kind of hard. You can bust it off rather than like having it be this goo that you're pulling up. And wear gloves. This is where you're going to want to wear gloves because a lot of this, if it comes in contact with your skin, it'll discolor it. It's just a chemical you don't really want on your hands. Where to foam those ceiling penetrations. I think that this was a ceiling fan that I had done. You could see in the upper right-hand corner, it's just this huge gap. So you drop a bead of foam around that. Real easy. Any exhaust penetrations, this is probably, say, a bathroom fan that goes maybe on the first floor and it's coming up through the second floor and exhausting out. Seal that up. You don't need air coming through there. Any kind of plumbing penetration, same thing. Again, here's your top plate that the joists sit on. Between the top plate and the drywall, great place to air seal. And in between like electrical cords and wires, you can always bust it out later if you don't like it there. And then now you've bought rigid foam. I don't have an example of rigid foam on me, but rigid foam is just, it comes at a certain R value and you can, it doesn't have to be a very high R value. And what you do is you cut it to size and then you would seal it in place and the foam will help hold it in place. And then all the insulation will pile on top of it. Insulation is really light, so it doesn't have to be weight bearing. So once you are done with your air sealing, you've sealed everything up in your house, really great. Now you want to look at venting your exhaust devices. So for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to say you have passive ventilation, which is where air is just moving on its own, right? Through stack effect, through wind, through roof jacks, mushroom vents, or gable vents, versus active, where you have active ventilation is when it's being moved by a fan. And you want those to go through your stem / gooseneck ventilations. Ideally, you don't want to route ductwork through your passive ventilation systems. So you've done this whole calculation, right? You're like, hey, I've got these number of roof jacks. I've got like all these little mushroom vents. And if you send your ductwork to this, that vent is going to disappear from your ventilation calculation. And you need to remove it because it has been pulled from doing one job and it's doing another. So another thing about venting. So on the left, we have somebody that tried to send ductwork to passive ventilation, and then they tried to use spray foam, probably to seal it up. And then as the spray foam was like not, staying solid, it's kind of gooey, they gave up and was like, good enough. It's not good enough. There is, in the case of the photo on the right, a properly sealed exhaust vent, and I can tell that it's also going to passive ventilation, which again, isn't ideal. It's not that you can't do it. It's just that you're going to have to remove it from your ventilation calculation, and you may not have enough ventilation afterwards. So just be forewarned, but you want a solid, tight seal all the way around, regardless. So when we're looking at our ductwork, there's really two kinds. So the easiest one to start with is your semi-rigid pipe. This is kind of more like a dryer vent, which you can get, but if you go into a hardware store, you should actually get something that looks more like the photo on the right. You only want to use these for bathroom fans because of the ridges, right? So inside these ridges, air is going to have to work harder to pass through them because there are all these friction points. And in a kitchen situation, grease can build up in these ridges. So they do not want you using them for kitchens, only bathroom fans. But your bathroom fan is going to have to work harder in order to get where it needs to go, to get air out where it needs to go, if you're using this sort of thing. The pros are that it's very easy to work with. It's very easy to cut. You can, if you're using them, you want to stretch it as much as possible. If you have this style, the one like pictured on the right has a little bit less give, but you can see, right, that you can like stretch it out as much as possible, which you definitely want to do if you're going to utilize this. Also on the photo of the right, I'm going to guess these are two fans that are being vented out together, which is totally fine. The ideal, but more difficult, is to build the pipe yourself. So what you get often is a flat piece that comes together like so and clicks together. Once it's clicked, it does not come off. What you want to do is when you're sizing it, you can get a pair of heavy duty tin snips and you cut it before it's put into a pipe. You will definitely want to have heavy duty gloves, ideally like this, or something that's going to keep you from getting cut because it will be very sharp. We have blunted ours with a little bit of foil tape just so that we're not cut, as this is a prop we've used hundreds of times. Then you snap them into place and can move your pipe from there. I'd recommend just building your kitchen pipe first. And if you're like, oh, that wasn't so easy. Why is Sherry complaining and acting like it's the worst? It might be fine. And then do this for your bathrooms as well. But if it's a nightmare and this is really difficult for you to do, then you'll have it out of the way and you can use flexible pipes for the rest. One of the things, another reason you want to use a stem vent is that your stem vent has this on the bottom. Instead of what a roof jack has, you have, oh, look, this is basically begging for a friend. If you're going to attach the flexible tubing, you want to, it'll fit right on there, right? And you would utilize a hose clamp and fit your hose clamp on here, fit your pipe on here, fit the hose clamp over it, tighten it down so it's really tight. You want to do this at the fan level as well. So your bathroom fan, your bathroom fan looks like this. Same thing. You're attaching, if you're using the flexible load, same thing with a hose clamp like this and attaching this and making sure it's extremely secure. And I'm going to utilize the stem vent because it's easier for me to hold in front of this tiny camera. With a stem vent, you can do several things. One is you're going to want to get some elbow pieces. You want a maximum of 3 bends. This is where it can get kind of tricky if your stem vent is far away from your bathroom fan or your kitchen fan. But you can see that these two are meant to go together like so. Fits in really easily. And then you would have your built pipe where to do the same thing. Hopefully These have had a lot of adventures, but you can fit in here as well. And what you want to do is make sure that these are well attached by getting, say, a small gutter screw would work really well here, like a little hex head gutter screw. And you can just zip, make sure that they're just really firm so that they're not going to fall off later, as temperatures can cause all kinds of expansion and contraction. You want to make sure it's really solidly on there. You can also, there are also devices that help you change vents of different sizes. If you had a really big fan here and you have a small stem vent there, you just get one of these adapters. You get it in all the same places you get your other piping stuff at the hardware store. If your vents are just missing, so say you want to do this and you have 3 fans and not a single stem vent, it's a good idea to have these professionally installed unless you know exactly what you're doing, because you're going to be punching holes into your roof. You can ask a roofer to do it. If you're putting in ventilation, you could also ask a home performance contractor to do it because they will be focusing on ventilation. But just make sure that when they're installing it, you're telling them where. You're like, right here, directly above my fan, so I don't have to build this long, elaborate set of pipes in order to get there. After that, you want to make sure that you are sealing your pipes. There is a seam that runs where you connect the two together. If you get this kind of piping, you'll want to just seal that up. A lot of the big home performance contractors use mastic because it's cheaper to get gallons of it because they're doing hundreds and hundreds of homes. It might actually be cheaper for you to get some foil tape. So I'll steal this joke from somebody I'd heard, where duct tape is like the Force. Okay, you have a light side and you have a dark side, and it holds the universe together. But ironically, duct tape does not work well on ducts. Foil tape is going to have the same similar properties to the metal because it's a metal tape to metal. So it's going to expand and contract at the same rate. So you want to seal it here. You want to seal it, even though you've screwed it in, you want to seal here at any points where you're connecting elbows to pipes or these different points. Just put some foil tape around it. And then after that, you're going to want to insulate. You can just get some R11 batting. Again, doesn't have to be pretty. You just wrap it around and twine it up like in this photo here. And then, and you also only have to insulate it down to the level where your insulation is. So if your insulation, you know, you're going to reach R49, you're like, I'm going to utilize, all right, that's 15.5 inches of, I think that's cellulose. I don't have to insulate the bottom 15.5 inches of this pipe. Another area is when we're talking about baffling. So there's 2 things you want to baffle in this case, right? There's heat producing fixtures and there's ventilation. So on a heat producing fixture, you have your pipe. What you want is to, sorry. We usually make videos of what we're doing. So what you want is for there to be a non-flammable baffle that's going to be 3 to 4 inches from the fixture. So if we're having treated metal, you can get a kind that has little foldy bends that could be really fancy, but it doesn't really have to be. It just has to be something flexible that you can utilize. And if this was your heat producing fixture, you want this gap of 3 to 4 inches between the pipe and the baffle itself. And you want the baffle to be 6 inches above insulation level. So by the time you're building your baffle and by the time you are insulating your duct work, you're going to want to know what kind of insulation you plan to use, because that's going to tell you the depth of insulation you're going to have in your final step. You need to know what 6 inches above the insulation level is going to be. So be sure to have that figured out. What you do then is with your metal baffle, You can use a little foil tape to hold it in place, but you're going to need to use screws. Gutter screws are a really great thing here. Fix it. And then at the very bottom, you can drop a bead of foam, you know, just to help kind of seal that in place. The same rules would go towards your non-IC, non-insulation contact rated recessed can lights. So this one is IC rated, right? So insulation can just blow right on top of it, no problem. But without, you'll want to put in that baffle as well. And here they use spray foam. They were trying something out. That's because they also weren't airtight. Something you can do inside of a recessed can light is get an insert. So what this is, this fits up inside of can lights falling apart. This fits up inside of the can light and it forms a seal here. This is where the light bulb would go, right? And then it forms a seal right up against the inside of the can light as well. And most recessed can lights, a lot of them you'll see with these kinds of inserts, and that's to create an airtight seal so that there's not this wild foaming thing in this picture. Maybe not a best practice, sorry. Then you want to baffle soffit vents. So a lot of times how I think of a soffit vent is kind of like a snorkel. What you have is your vent, and it's on the inside here. And you have, let's say this is your soffit. So here's your roof deck up here. Then you have your vent and your baffle comes here. And then insulation goes right here, right? You can have, you can buy, this is our very battle torn soffit. This is the size of them. A lot of them have measurements that'll tell you your on-center measurements. Ideally, what you want to do is have only 1 inch between the soffit and the roof deck. In the photo on the right, it's an excellent installation. The baffle would technically go up in between the roof joists to be closer to the deck. It would fold up inside and in between and go up in there. And the reason that they propose that or recommend that is because every inch lost is an inch of R value, right? So if you have a 6-inch joist and you're doing it at the bottom in the way that it is in this picture, you're losing 5 inches of R value in that one section. But sometimes roof pitch can make it really difficult to do that. And so if it's really hard to do that, you can just do what they did here in the picture on the right. You can actually see a bead of foam there at the bottom. What they were doing there was they were marking where to blow the insulation to, which is a tip I'll go into later. It's not sealing anything. Another thing you want to think about are dams. So this can be a place where perhaps you have an attic that the access is inside your conditioned space. And what you don't want is to open up your attic access and have all this insulation pour down on you, right? So you build a dam to keep that from happening. This can also be the case where on the photo of the right, they were looking to have storage. So they wanted to have storage in there. Keep in mind that the storage, in this case, the R value is 0 underneath that storage, unless you build a platform, which some people will do, and then insulate under the platform and have storage sit on top of that. But, you know, if you really need storage up there, that is a way to go about it. And the other piece is that you want to make sure that on the left, you can see how the insulation is kind of like a snowdrift. That's really not ideal. You want consistent R49, we're just going to go with that, insulation across the entire attic space. So the dam allows you to have that R49 right up to the edge of your scope of work. You can drag plywood up there if you want to. That's kind of tricky. It's not always easy to get the right pieces up there. One of the easiest things you can do is to use batting insulation. You can just take the rolls, right? Batting is the big rolls, kind of like a carpet, and you roll it, you cut it, just put it onto the next one, roll it, cut it, and you stack these rolls, and it's this lightweight dam. It's easy for you to move around. It's easy for you to measure, and you build that up around the entrance to your attic space, or in this case, next to a storage space. Easiest thing to do. You can also use moisture treated cardboard or foam board, but you shouldn't be using those two things around the attic access, but you could use it around a storage space. So here is a picture of an insulation batting dam. The one on the left is a shot from above that shows how, it's holding back all of your pink. This is fiberglass blown insulation. And then a shot from just a slightly different angle, so you can see it comes right up to the edge of the attic access. Looks great. Next, you want to insulate the interior attic access door itself. So because otherwise, it's R value of 0. So there's two things to think about. One is air sealing. You can use some gasket foam, like the picture on the left. It just creates just a nice little, airtight or closer to airtight seal, so that when your attic access is up, against your ceiling, it's really just snug, and you're not having it be this air leaking place. And then the door itself, great thing to do is you can use R30. If you want to insulate it to R30, for example, you can just get 3 pieces of rigid foam that's R10, stack them on top of each other, glue them, cut them with an X-Acto knife. Works really well. Here they made it look really nice. They wrapped all the edges in tape, and then they also wrapped the batting, and it looks like some kind of like moisture, like building coating, not coating, like plastic or whatever. I've seen people also, you could use like a bed sheet. Like if you also just don't want to pop your head up there to look at like raw insulation, you would cover it with something it would not be plastic. It would be something that was moisture permeable. House wrap, that's what I'm thinking of. You can also, with your conditioned area, if it's a conditioned space and you have a ladder, that's a little bit trickier. So you can use R10 rigid foam here as well. And you can just basically build almost like a little shelter for your stairs to pop up into. You're only really going to get away with R10, but it is much better than nothing. Or you can purchase stuff in a separate space. I have links to a person that actually has a video here on YouTube that teaches you how to make the little one on the left, and then the other one on the right, you just have to Google based on your size of your stairs, of your attic access. And then here is just the tip for if you really want to store stuff in that attic, you can insulate below deck. You want it to be less than 64 square feet or 5%. Just thinking about your R value impact. It's just a weak spot. If you think about it like you're wearing a sweater with like a huge hole in it, like you're going to feel it. So that's why you want to avoid it. And then your last and final step, and actually the easiest step of all of this, is actually blowing in the insulation. I'm going to touch a little bit on preparation and talk about equipment and some tips when you're blowing it in, and then that'll be our wrap. So these are pictures of contractor level insulation jobs and with insulation equipment. So this is also something where if you decide that this is too much work for you and you want to hire someone to do it, this is what you could possibly expect. Sometimes they'll have the tubes come through your house, or sometimes they'll have the tubes, they'll take off a roof jack / mushroom vent, and they'll feed it in through the top that way. It's a little less invasive. I've seen it both ways, depends on what's available to them. But you have a tube at the bottom. You have something that is kind of grinding up or loosening up the insulation. It's, it's pretty fluffy. And then it comes up into the tube, up into your attic space. So especially if you're blowing cellulose, you're going to want to think about dust not coming back in. You don't want fiberglass either. So what you can do is cover some stuff in plastic near the opening and then tent the opening. So if you're picturing, if this was your pipe, you have plastic and you're tied to the pipe itself, put a little tape on there so that it doesn't sneak down into your living space. You can put up markers These can look like a variety of things. A lot of times when you're buying your loose fill insulation, you get these little puppies that'll show you, depending on what kind you have. This one, R49, is 16 inches. So you can just measure and put them throughout your space, and you know what number you're up to. You can do, and fill your, just blowing your insulation to that point. You can also just use your spray foam. Do some measurements, do them pretty frequently along your joists. And like we saw the picture of the baffle, just draw a little line, just so that you know how deep and consistent to keep it. Before you do that, put up your markers, make sure you remove any plywood that you've been working on, that you've been walking on. You want to remove all of that. You want to make sure you know where your phone and keys are, that sort of thing, because you're going to be burying everything in insulation. And then you grab a buddy and a bribe, because, you know, you should always bribe the people who are helping you out. This is what a larger scale machinery looks like, but a lot of places, if they're selling insulation, a lot of them are renting units that are a little bit smaller. You can see that this is really big, it fits in the back of a really big truck. The smaller units are made to go in more residential sized vehicles. But the concept is the same. You load in insulation. You're in this case, your friend's loading in insulation, and then you are up top, like blowing in the stuff. If any of you in the comments have experience working with, like, say, a machine from like Home Depot or Lowe's, love to hear your experience with it. I have no experience with that. You start at the very furthest corners and you work your way, you fill. It could take several hours, depending on the machine and depending on the size of your attic. And you want to make sure you're just staying on your joists and you're inching back into the attic, to the attic access area, or to the end, to the dam that's going to be at the end of your scope of work. And eventually you will be on the other side of the dam, filling it all in until you're done. And that's it. It's the easiest part of the whole project. Probably the most satisfying. And here's just another picture of how it rolls. And then you're done. So you can relax. One tip with itchy insulation, if you're dealing with old itchy insulation, I forgot to mention, is I've been told by the contractors you will get itchy. It's not from blowing the new stuff. It's from sifting around in the old stuff. That you don't take a hot shower right after, you take a cold shower, because your pores will open up and little fiberglass will inch deeper into your pores. So you take a cold shower first, you know, rub it off of your arms and legs, then you can take your hot shower afterwards. So random tip I heard from the pros. For those of you in Oregon, this is how the cash incentives work, at least as of the recording of this video. Weatherization can be expensive, and that's probably, you might be doing it yourself in order to save money. So when you're insulating your attic, it is one time where do it yourself, you can still get the same kind of incentives as contractors get, as you get if you go with a contractor. So they have, here's what you can get as well if you're lower income, and these income guidelines will change every year. So take that with a grain of salt. But as of the point of this recording, if you're looking at, you're making as one person household 25 to 55,000 a year, then you actually can get double incentives. So this is where attic insulation, it says 30 to 75 cents per square foot. You're seeing a bit of a range there, but that's what you're going to get reimbursed at, help offset the costs. And that is for PGE, Pacific Power, Northwest Natural Gas customers, is where you go through Energy Trust for. And you just do it online, and it's like really easy. You'll take pictures. People come through, you may get an inspector come out and take a look at your work to make sure you did it right. If you followed all the rules here, nobody that came to our physical workshops ever failed that inspection. So it'll be the same for you. I believe in you. If you are heating with oil, then you would go through SHOW, State Home Oil Weatherization. This covers rebates for those who have, and your main heating source is oil, propane, kerosene, butane, or wood. And they're just going to reimburse 25% of your costs. You need to keep receipts for your supplies for this program, right? It's not based on what you're doing. It's based on what the cost is. So keep your receipts. And I have links, I'll have links down below for where you can get both of those incentives, or either of those incentives rather. Additionally, this is a really great thing. I often get asked, you get bit by a DIY bug. Well, what about a finished attic? Hey, maybe I want to insulate my floor now, or maybe I want to replace my windows, whatever. Energy Trust has a specifications manual, tons of great info in there. It's a free download. I'll provide the link for that as well, for you to get into details. And hopefully what you learned today will help you with some of the language that's used, some of the technical language that's used in that thing. So sum up, right, is the end of this, you're going to have more comfortable home, reduce your energy costs, shrink your carbon footprint. And in some areas that have home energy scores, such as the city of Portland, it can actually increase the value of your home. An energy score is a program or requirement wherein the home buyer understands what the energy burden of their home is likely to be and what kinds of energy costs they may be facing per year and what they could do to change it. Thank you very much for bearing with me through this long video, and I hope it was informative, and good luck on your project.